Behold, my glorious supporter EyePatchNotes has requested some discussion on Duo Boons and multiclassing. Do Duo Boons equal multiclassing? So we're going to discuss that. This wasn't actually a question that EyePatchNotes submitted. EyePatchNotes, you waited an unnecessarily long time for a parlay that I recorded, but something went wrong on my end and it was gone, and I didn't notice for a long time. That's my bad. So you did technically ask this question, you just didn't frame it as a parlay. You gave me a really generous tip on a stream. Well-meaning, having nothing to do with parlay, you just wanted to, and you jokingly asked if Duo Boons are like multiclassing. Let's talk about that for a few, shall we? Duo Boons being the Hades mechanic, where two different goddesses will, if you get certain boons from each deity, allow you to get a duo boon between the two deities, this kind of a combination of their mechanics thematically. And multiclassing in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, a topic we've increasingly discussed more and more on this channel and on streams, is a mechanic where, let's say you're a ranger in D&D 5e, and you're level 5, and you level up to level 6. You can take a level in a different class. Instead of becoming a level 6 ranger, you could be a level 5 ranger still, but now also become a level 1 bard, let's say, provided that you meet the requirements. This can confer various benefits, but has the interesting balancing mechanic of not making you two classes exactly simultaneously. You're becoming okay with two classes rather than really good in one class. Sometimes there can be really interesting synergies, but one of the cool things about D&D 5th edition is that you often, if you don't have some clever combination in mind, you're often worse off for multiclassing. So it's not a game that demands you come up with some overwrought, complicated combination. It's just a game that if you give it some thought, you can maybe come up with a really interesting, novel combination that's well and truly simply different than what you would have gotten otherwise. You would have been perfectly fine and likely better off if you just kept to one class, but there are unique benefits you can gain by multiclassing, something that EyePatchNotes has asked actually quite a few questions about, and there are more to come, and a topic I love deeply. Are they the same? Of course they are. Yeah, I mean, it has the same dealio where going for a duo boon doesn't necessarily make you better off in Hades. It kind of just gives you access to a very specific effect, and unless you utilize it in a very specific way, it likely doesn't do much of anything for you. There are a few duo boons that are pretty much just good no matter what you're doing, but a lot of them don't do much of anything unless you have intended all along to build up to that one thing. Getting them randomly is only infrequently very powerful, at least depending on the duo boon. And it's the same with multiclassing. Can multiclassing builds be really good? Yeah, they can be undeniably the most powerful way to play a certain approach. There are plenty of classes, and especially subclasses, in 5th edition that are nearly always better off if they take like one level in another class. A really, really good example is Circle of Spores Druid. Circle of Spores Druid has a thing where they're kind of in a symbiotic relationship with fungus, and they can gain a lot of hit points. They can get a lot of health, but the druids have notoriously not a lot of ways to get more armor. They can have okay armor pretty easily, but they don't have a lot of ways to increase it. So at higher levels, a Circle of Spores Druid is in the awkward position of being a punching bag. They have a ton of health, but it's very easy for them to lose that health. So they would really rather spend a little of their time, have a little opportunity loss, get a little bit less health when they have so much, and just increase their armor, for goodness sakes, and get hit a little bit less. That's a much better, benefit given how much health they have. Getting a little more armor is really valuable. And if they multiclass into monk for one level, they, using the very same stats that they were already building, will get monk's unarmored defense, gaining armor based on their dexterity and wisdom, which they already wanted, probably already have a lot of. Essentially almost for free, giving them a massive armor value. This is very, very good. There is virtually no opportunity cost loss to spending one level, a meager level once they're like 10th or 15th level or something, to just take one little level in monk and get an enormous armor boost. There is very little argument that you wouldn't want to do that unless you didn't want to for a character purpose, or maybe you really are saving for that specific druid feature you want as soon as possible. Sure, there are drawbacks, but it's very good. It's not hard to imagine. Like, obviously, sometimes multiclassing is very good. Same thing with Duo Boons. Everyone who hears me say, oh, Hades Duo Boons are, only sometimes good. Well, what about this one? Yeah, sure. There are a few of them that are nearly always. It's like, okay, whatever you were doing, you might as well do this. Hunting blades. Sure. Everybody likes the meme on hunting blades. You get a cast that hits in a large area and has automatic tracking. It just homes in on enemies. You can do a boss fight and just dodge the whole fight and hit cast without aiming at anything, and you will eventually win the boss fight. Is pretty good, It's not the be-all end-all. Some fights that you're going to get enough damage coming in that you would want to increase that, sure. It's not the most overpowered thing in the game or anything, but is it obviously really good pretty much no matter when you get it? Yeah, yes. And Artemis is one of the two gods involved, and Artemis boons are nearly always beneficial. You just have to get Ares cast, and then like an Artemis boon, a core Artemis boon, and you're in business, baby. Like you have gigantic homing shurikens that will win every fight for you, provided you stay alive long enough. Obviously good most of the time. No consequence for taking that? No, there's an opportunity cost. There could be reasons you wouldn't want to get it, but is it always good? Yes, it is. So I think that the two are very similar. Yeah. Am I addicted to both of them? Yes. I noticed that in my Hades streams, nearly every single stream has been a duo boon. I played like last week, and we won a run using a really cool build that didn't have a duo boon in it. And I saw that, and I had this kind of moment of distress where I looked at it and had this dread fill my eyes as I thought, oh, it's been a little bit long since that's happened. Like nearly every win, nearly every run I've done, I went for a duo boon without really realizing it. And there are lots of good builds in Hades that a duo boon or various duo boons would at least only have a mediocre benefit to the build. You might just get them, sure. And I do have my Mirror of Night set up to get them more often, but there are plenty of good strategies that at least care not for any particular duo boon, let alone wanting to avoid them. That might be a bit much, but it's the same thing in Dungeons and Dragons. There are plenty of builds where, yeah, like on balance, you might be better off if you multiclass, but there's a good number of situations where you could kind of take it or leave it. It's probably good overall, but there are benefits either way, so meh, In particular, I think that Dungeons & Dragons does a little bit of a better job with this. The thing about Hades is that it's nearly impossible, unless you do it on purpose, to do a run where you don't get multiple gods and goddesses, which means you are very, very often, almost always, at least eligible for like one or two duo boons during a run. You might not get them, you might, you might not get more boons from that god or goddess or whatever, but you are at least capable of getting a duo boon without doing anything special. You could not even know about duo boons at all, and you at least could get one pretty much every run when you play Hades. Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons in 5th edition, you do need to go out of your way to do it. It's not like it'll just happen, or you'll be level 5 and everyone will be like, so like, when you're gonna take that multi-class dip? Maybe there are play groups like that, but the default is to stay the course in D&D. Whereas in Hades, the default is you might run into a duo boon. They just kind of come up, and the question is automatically posed. Whereas in D&D, it's kind of assumed that you won't unless you have decided to. Yeah, I also, of course, in Dungeons and Dragons, it has a lot of story implications. In Hades, the way that the game's, plot or framing or story works is that it makes perfect sense you'd have gods cooperating to help you get out of the underworld. That is what happens in the game. That's the plot, Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons, while maybe not truly unusual, there's plenty of understandable circumstances where a character would be two classes in a D&D story. It represents something. If you're just wandering along and you're a ranger and you become a monk, like, that's probably a noteworthy moment in your character's life. Like that represents something, that does mean something. You were a fighter and you became a warlock. I can think of plenty of reasons why that might happen, but that's certainly a noteworthy character moment, an unusual character moment. Whoa, like you're just going along studying the martial tradition with your friggin', I don't know, like a spear or something, and then along comes a hyper powerful warlock patron to say, hey, you want to sign up for a loan in exchange for your eternal soul, and you a martial paragon, say, oh yeah, sure, no problem, and suddenly you're doing damage based on charisma. Like, I'm like, it certainly says something, right? And so multiclassing is much more of a statement than like a Duo Boon in Hades is like, well, it is a Hades run. Whereas if you multiclass in D&D 5th edition, at least for most playgroups, it's like, okay, like that's worthy of notice, you know, it's something unusual. I've been watching a little bit of the Critical Role. Critical Role is a really popular Dungeons and Dragons campaign show thing. Live stream, depends on the campaign you're watching, but anyway, that I've, you know, a couple of my friends are crazy about, and I really like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, so I wanted to understand what people really like about it. These things are not usually my cup of tea, and so I thought, okay, this might not be my favorite, but I'll try, I'll give it a go. And yeah, like I've seen things that I could like about it. I'm not sure yet, but I've watched a couple episodes and I feel some ways. I didn't start at the beginning. And yeah, like there are some very interesting plot point spoilers where characters multiclass for like a really interesting lore related reason. So for example, I have a couple examples of this. So I played a barbarian, Dragonborn barbarian, and he was an ex-pirate. He was a shipwright on a pirate ship. So when I started playing him, he was a barbarian, just a barbarian, and I went, you know, 4 or 5 levels as a barbarian. And that didn't represent him being like level 1 to level 5. In terms of his life overall, he's probably more experienced than that. But the way that we reconciled that, since he has a long history of using these abilities, is that he was kind of trying to get away from the pirate stuff a little bit, and the violence, and the killing, and the pillaging. But then eventually, circumstances contrived in the campaign that he felt he and his companions were in enough danger that he should really bring his full skills to bear. And that's when I took levels in my multiclass that I wanted, which was Artificer. Now, barbarians can't cast spells while raging. They're too angry to focus on spellcasting. Pretty distinct aspect of barbarians, because even classes like Fighter that rarely get any magic directly have, like, they could cast spells, they just may or may not get them, you know? Whereas barbarians, they cannot cast spells while they're raging, which they would like to be doing basically every time they fight. Maybe they won't be, but they would certainly like to be. And depending on how much combat's in your campaign. Anyway, I was raging every time I was fighting. So taking a multiclass option that has spells, like Artificer, is a little weird for a barbarian on the surface, because they can't cast those spells while fighting. Now, it makes a certain kind of sense. Sure, you can use spells for utility. There are plenty of spells that are useful out of combat. And the way I would argue it, of course, is that barbarians are a really combat-focused class, so playing a barbarian may be rather boring for you if you spend a lot of time out of combat. You just won't have stuff to do. And that was one reason from a player's perspective. But from a character perspective, this character I was playing is a shipwright. How did he build ships? Well, using his knowledge as an artificer, of course. He casts the mending cantrip to fix little cracks on the ship. Mending fixes inorganic objects. So it doesn't have to be inorganic, but not living. It's not a heal. It fixes, you know, objects. I would rule you can do plants, but some people might not, you know, like cracks in a ship, or you broke a glass, or you tore a rip in your shirt or something. Mending does that. And artificers are, among classes that get magic, a class that gets a lot of forms of magical things that don't require you to cast a spell in combat. They let you kind of build or enhance items or weapons, and then you can be using those things that are magical, but don't require you to cast magic while fighting. It is a relatively beneficial class, potentially, for a a martial physical warrior to take, even if they're not going to use spells in combat for damage, which I had no intention of doing. And it worked out pretty well. It was a fun combination. If you play a lot of D&D and you're curious, this character was a Path of the Totem Warrior Barbarian and an Artillerist Artificer. And I used the Protector Eldritch Cannon from Artillerist to give myself a bunch of temporary hit points to kind of like shield heal myself, top myself off while raging, which made this character extraordinarily tanky. Combined with Danger Sense, a barbarian feature that makes you better at dodging, spells and stuff, traps that you can see. This made the character very, very durable. Did good damage. Barbarians do good damage. Infusions can be great for a barbarian. Infuse your shield and sword or whatever with a few artificer infusions, and you're cooking with gas. You have super high armor, very, very good health that even restores itself a little with that Protector Eldritch Cannon from Artillerist. A lot of barbarians are not doing much with their bonus action. There's a few subclasses that are, but plenty that aren't. So you can move around your Eldritch Cannon without really losing much. There's a lot of benefits. It's great. Look into it. But anyway, that little story was because I thought EyePatchNotes might be interested. But my point was that in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, multiclassing can represent a lot more than just a build choice about who the character is. It could be used as a story beat. Now, you might have a character that doesn't use it as a story beat. There are a number of classes in D&D 5e that are built around the idea that you have this, whatever it is, innately. So, for example, sorcerers are spellcasters that are defined by the fact that they have magic innately. They didn't learn it, they have it. They were born with it, generally. Or they got it some other way that was kind of innate. It's not like they have to learn it or study it. They just kind of know it. Maybe, I would argue from a flavor perspective, they learn more about it by like getting to know themselves better and using it more. But that's just them discovering things that were already inside of them or some such. Or learning, they see someone cast a spell and they think, it kind of feels like I could channel my innate magical energy or whatever to do that. And then, oh yeah, I can cast Fireball, and that represents them learning Fireball at 5th level or whatever. And so a character like a sorcerer, for example, from a lore perspective, I don't think it's that remarkable for a sorcerer to multiclass because one of the two classes is something they just are. They didn't really do it. They just kind of had it, And so if they're a sorcerer and a warlock, well, they innately had some magic and they got a taste for the stuff and they made a bargain for more. Not particularly unusual, something you would think a lot of people in that situation might do. Or they're a sorcerer and a fighter, a weird combination mechanically in a lot of cases, but it's not particularly unusual. They're a noble who was trained from a young age to wield the sword, and their parents are all magic-y or whatever, so they innately have some magic. Nothing to see here, not particularly unusual from a story perspective. Whereas a character like a druid, that becomes like an artificer. That's weird. Like, why? They're studying being in touch with nature and the natural world, but then they also have knowledge of the least possible natural things, like guns and building magic machines. Maybe, but a bit of a head scratcher, right? Certainly says something about that character for them to be like an armorer artificer, basically Iron Man, but also a druid. A lot of play groups would interpret that a druid can't even wear metal armor. I don't rule that, but your dungeon master might. Because it keeps them out of touch with nature. I don't know, man, aura is natural, but people have different rulings about that. My point is simply exactly that makes a statement, Even if you only pick Artificer Druid from a gameplay perspective, from a mechanical perspective as a player, that does kind of automatically raise a question about your character. People in your Dungeons & Dragons world, wherever you're playing, probably know about druids. It's not the most uncommon thing. And yeah, it will probably seem odd to them if your druid is toting a flintlock pistol, people don't need to know much about magic. Commoners in any town will probably look at you a bit funny if you're walking around like that. So even if you have no intention of role-playing something like that about the character, it will affect you automatically. Whereas in Hades, I feel like it actually couldn't be more the opposite. It could very easily say nothing at all about the run you're doing that you have a Duo Boon. Yeah, since this wasn't a formal parlay and like not a serious question that you actually meant me to make a video about, I don't really have like a direction here. I just thought I'd like waffle on it for a little. Hope that was fun. Do I have anything else to say? Yeah, like apparent contradictions in multiclassing lore can, I think, be really interesting. I have a character that I'm just starting to play a campaign as. They're an Order Cleric, a level 2 Order Cleric, and they're a Wild Magic Sorcerer, level 1 Wild Magic Sorcerer. So this character's story is that they're a gambling addict, and this awakened them, made them aware, or maybe it was a chicken before the egg thing, and this was why all along, made them aware that they have a well of unpredictable, difficult to control magic inside of them, possibly because of their parentage. I won't get into plot spoilers, but anyway, that's something my DM and I were talking about. And so they decided to try to join a sort of magical Alcoholics Anonymous to detox from gambling by joining an Order Cleric order, church, monastery. Anyway, they became an Order Cleric, okay, and began worshiping a deity that governs order or orderliness. And yes, that seems like kind of a contradiction. They're basically a chaos sorcerer, and now they're an Order Cleric? What's going on? But you can see how it makes perfect sense, potentially, that if somebody has no choice but to have this element of unpredictable chaos inside them, they might very well gravitate towards something that restores order to their life or makes them feel that way. And mechanically, it really checks out. There's a pretty interesting combo between if people are playing D&D 5e and you want to know, the Voice of Authority feature for Order Clerics and wild magic, like Tides of Chaos and stuff. You can potentially trigger a lot of different effects all in one turn by quickening a spell that targets like an ally and enemies, and then you're getting back your Tides of Chaos effect to give your attacks advantage, but then also giving your allies another attack and also getting 2 spells on one turn. It can be a really crazy amount of action economy. It can be mechanically powerful, but it also kind of makes sense from a storytelling perspective. I realized that you could trigger everything I just said with Magic Missile, a spell that doesn't miss, it just automatically hits, and thought, a character that is struggling with internal chaos that gravitates toward using a spell that is the definition of being reliable sounds very believable. It seems like that's something a character would do. And then I thought, yeah, I mean, maybe I'll build a whole character around doing this kind of corner case thing with Magic Missile. You trigger Voice of Authority by directing one of the missiles at an ally, which is targeting them with a spell, which allows them to attack with Voice of Authority. This means you get to attack twice, cast the cantrip, and then quicken Magic Missile, and target enemies with most of the missiles, but one at your ally, and then they get an attack too, and it's almost like you got 3 attacks off, full damage effects during your one turn, at the cost of sorcery points and a spell slot. And you have to do a tiny amount of damage to your ally, but they'll live. It's just get consent first, be nice, ask nicely. Can I shoot you for like 3 damage in exchange for a lot killing the enemies? They're probably gonna say yes. They'll be fine. Pick a tanky ally, a ranger or something. One of my party members is a ranger, lots of health, and they're using a bow, so they have long range. You get it. Very nice. And that kind of emergent fusion between a character's mechanics and unique choice of combining different mechanics available to them, that kind of sort of naturally, if you look for where that naturally creates storytelling, is what I find really fun about Dungeons and Dragons. And from a storytelling perspective, Hades doesn't really do that. It's just kind of something that happens. That's not the focus of the game, you know. But it is interesting. It is kind of the same gameplay mechanism where things just sort of emerge, and you realize, oh, this could be a cool combo since I have, you know, Demeter and Zeus available. Might as well go for that Duo Boon. And 5th edition kind of takes that to the next level and offers an opportunity to make that into a storytelling experience, sort of a combination of something you intended that you know you're going to like playing, and a surprising, really interesting, intuitive, natural flavor for the character that feels really fused with its mechanical identity. I love that. Absolutely love it, which is why I spent 25 minutes waffling about it. So thank you so much for your patience, EyePatchNotes. I hope you had a good time.